Hello, welcome to a brand new creature tutorial. This tutorial is going to go through the bone weighting modes of creature. In particular, a new fancy bone weighting mode called Smart Bone Weighting has been added to the creature animation tool, and I think all of you guys will really appreciate it as we continue to update the new features that you can use in the creature animation tool. Okay, so let's get started. This tutorial assumes you're already familiar with the overall creature animation pipeline, and I'm going to touch on the topic of bone weighting in particular with regards to the bone weighting modes and also the new bone weighting mode called Smart Weighting. Okay, so I have a character here, and as you can see, it's a rather simple character with a bunch of body parts. It's all put together nicely, and the bones are all laid out correctly on the character as well. Alright? Okay, so by default this character has already been weighted by me, but I'm going to go through the bone weighting modes again, and we'll see what we can do with bone weighting. Alright? So bone weighting is basically the process of telling the creature animation system how much influence each bone has on each part of the mesh of the character, right? And so here's a useful tip for you. You can either select the bones on the right like this, or you can actually hold down your Shift button and click on a bone to switch between bones in bone weighting mode. Okay? And then you can basically visualize which or how much each bone affects the mesh based on the colors of the gradients, right? So that the more white it is, the more influence it has on the mesh. You can also see on the upper left what mesh regions the bone is actually influencing, right? So in this case, I know that this bone over here influences both the torso and the head. And then finally, you can change the affected regions by moving your mouse over to affected regions, clicking on that, and you can pick which regions the bones are affecting. Okay, so that's all simple stuff, which I've covered in the other tutorials, but that's a quick overview again. Now, let's get back to the original topic, which is the different bone weighting modes. All right, so I'm going to go through the most basic one, which is manual weighting, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. If you used any 3D program, Maya, Blender, Houdini, whatever, you're going to have manual bone weighting. Manual bone weighting involves the process of going in directly painting in the weights like a paintbrush, right? So in manual bone weighting mode, you can change the radius of your brush, right? You can make it smaller, and you can go in and paint like I'm just painting over the regions, right? And it only paints over the affected regions, so you don't have to worry about clicking here, for example, because in this case the bone doesn't affect the coat because I've set the affected regions to only affect the arm. So that's kind of cool. All right, so you hold on your mouse and click to basically paint in the points, and then to remove the points or to erase them, you hold down Alt, all right, and that will erase the points, right? Simple. Okay, so again, to paint, you hold on click, and then you basically paint over. To erase, you hold down Alt, and that erases. Okay, simple. Now, the next thing you want to do is to smooth out the weights in manual bone weighting mode. So very simple, just click on Smooth. Okay, and that smooths out the weights. Right, so that's manual bone weighting mode. Okay, so it's useful if you want to directly tweak values, right? Sometimes you want to directly weigh some parts of the mesh region with a certain bone, so you do have to use manual bone weighting mode. The next mode I am going to talk about is auto weighting, which was the default easiest bone weighting mode with creature previously. Now we're in auto bone weighting mode, and auto bone weighting mode is a smarter version of bone weighting, where essentially you get to tweak a couple of parameters in the bone weight rigging tool, and you can click two buttons, either apply or apply to all. If you click apply to all, it's going to run those parameters and automatically weigh all the bones in your character over here. If you click apply, it's only going to apply those parameters, those auto weighting parameters, onto the target bone or the selected group of bones, right? So remember that, and we can get going. Now let's go through a couple of the parameters here. The first one is iterations. I always set that to maximum unless you have a very slow machine. Now the higher the iterations, the better the quality, so I highly recommend you set iterations to the maximum. The more interesting things to tweak are radius and influence. So radius determines essentially the radius which the auto weighting algorithm starts with. It will determine how it's actually going to distribute the influence values on the different bones. And then the influence is going to determine how far those values actually diffuse or leak out into its neighboring regions, right? So let me give you an example. So for example here, if I set the radius to be really, really large and I click apply, you can see that it's because the radius is larger, more parts of this bone are now affecting the mesh, right? If I reduce the radius and I click apply, you can see now the gradation's reduced, right? It's less white. Okay, but the other thing I mentioned too is the influence, right? So once you set the radius, you have to set the influence. The influence determines how far it leaks out into its neighboring vertices. So if I actually reduce the influence, let's see what happens. Let's click apply now. You see it's now more concentrated, right? So that's kind of cool. So essentially between radius and influence, you can actually determine, you can actually control how far the values are distributed or spread out when you do bone weighting for each bone. And if you click apply to all, like right now, it's going to apply this bone weighting to the rest of the mesh, right? It's all done. And we can go to test mode, and we can see the results, right? That's pretty funny, but we can see the results of our weighting, right? So again, you should tweak around the values, tweak around the values, and you can get different results. Okay, so that is the auto bone weighting algorithm. I highly recommend you use it. That was the default algorithm people would fall back on for auto weighting and quickly getting results in Creature. Well, I'm happy to introduce a new form of weighting which is even simpler, called smart weighting. And this is another algorithm that has just been added, and this is even simpler to use than auto weighting. It's also smarter, hence called smart weighting. Now it might give you different results than auto weighting. That's why we're offering these 3 different options. You can pick and choose and try different algorithms to see which one you prefer, and having more choices is never a bad thing. So what is smart weighting? It's super simple. The system will automatically try to figure out the best, or in its view, the best way to weigh all your bones, okay? Based on how they're posed, how much area they're occupying for the target mesh and all that. It's going to figure everything out by itself. And all you need to tweak is the smooth iterations, how smooth the results are after you apply smart weighting. That's it. Okay, so this could be the new default standard. If you guys like it, make it a default for getting a really, really fast, high quality bone weighting result. So let's try smart weighting. So I'm going to set the smooth iterations to a high value and click apply to all. Okay, and now you can see it's automatically figured out, right, how much influence each bone has on the mesh. And let's try out. Let's see how it actually weighs. See, it actually gives some decent results. It's not bad actually, and it does a pretty decent job weighing the bones for you automatically, without almost any tweaking. You just have to tweak the smooth iterations. So we go back again, go to smart, and if I reduce the smooth iterations, you'll notice that the results are more concentrated, right? So let's look at the results again. Yeah, so if I go to smart, let's reduce it even more. So the results are less diffused. If I set it to the maximum, you notice the results are diffused more into its neighboring components, right? So just by tweaking this single parameter, you can get pretty high quality bone weighting results automatically, very, very fast. So I recommend using smart bone weighting if you can. All right. Okay, and finally, let's take a look at our final result. Let's see what our smart bone weighting has given us for our character. So here is our character animation, and you can see it's actually pretty compelling. This is the result of our smart bone weighting algorithm with a bunch of motors applied to the character. There's IK on it, on the legs. There is a free FK to pin the bottom of the foot to the ground. There are IK rotate motors on the arm, and there's a move balance motor to give it the overall gait, and we have a bunch of things like physics running through the system to do the physics of the coat, right? Anyway, but you get the idea. So this is the result of our smart bone weighting on this character. And you can see we achieved a really compelling result by just simply clicking a single button. There was no actual manual tweaking involved. So again, I recommend using smart bone weighting if you can. And let's see how it responds under running. That's a pretty funny animation. You can see the smart bone weighting holds up pretty well with very nice deformations, very nice high quality deformations on the character. Okay, so that basically concludes this tutorial. I hope you had fun watching it, and I hope it was useful for you. You can consider the 3 different modes again. The manual bone weighting, if you want absolute control, if you want to paint stuff directly, paint weights directly on the character. Auto bone weighting, if you want it to be automatic, but you still want a bit more control, you want to fine-tune the iterations and the radius, and of course how much it influences the neighboring vertices. If you wanted that control, go for auto weighting. It's still a very viable approach. And if you just want to, shut your brain off and say, hey, creature, just handle all the bone weighting for me. Just give me something I can use very, very quickly. Use smart bone weighting, and chances are, in most cases, it's going to give you a very high quality result immediately. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial again, and I hope you like this new smart bone weighting algorithm, because I think it's going to save you a lot of time and get you the results you want very fast. Thanks for watching.